Hi, everyone. I'm Julie Zuckerman, author of the book Jeremiah, and welcome to the April Literary Modiin author event. I'm actually coming to you from Jerusalem today. I'm in the middle of a bat mitzvah party. So I will out to Yael and family. And I hope you can't hear the music behind me. But anyway, today is day 569, our interminable reality here. And these are very difficult days here between Pesach less than 2 weeks ago, holiday of freedom, Yom HaShoah past Thursday, and beginning Tuesday night this week, Yom HaZikaron, followed by Yom HaSmut, Memorial Day, followed by Independence Day. And I'll just quote I am Guri said, Shlomik Shlom Ami, which I would loosely translate to my well-being goes according to the well-being of my people. So every day here is very complex, politically, emotionally, and I know that you all join with me in hoping that we see our beloved 59 of our messages home soon, the ability for everyone here to live in peace and dignity. And I'll say a few more words about that at the end. But now I want to turn to our main event, which is something very enjoyable, and that is the release of new Jewish books into the world, even when the stories are difficult to hear. This is the first time we're actually doing a special event around Yom Shoah, so all the books no Holocaust. And yeah, I will get started. Talk to you about the format of today's event, which is that each author will speak for about 15 minutes, and then we open up to questions. We have a large attendance, so everybody is on mute, but you can put your questions in the chat box, and if you have any technical difficulties, just send a private note to me. Now I will introduce our first author. Brooke Randel is a writer, editor, and associate creative director in Chicago. Her writing has been published in Public Campus, Hypertext Magazine, Jewish Fiction, Smoke Long Quarterly, and elsewhere. The granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor, she writes on issues of memory, trauma, family, and history. She'll be talking to us about her memoir also here. So let me spotlight you, Brooke, and then take a look at it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me, Julie. As she just mentioned, my name is Brooke Randel. I'm the author of Also Here, Love, Literacy, and the Legacy of the Holocaust. The story of this book starts about 9 years ago with my grandma Goldie Indig. 9 years ago, I was not planning to write a book. I was just calling my grandma to say hello. And in the middle of a normal phone call, she just randomly said, "You should write about my life." And we were talking about an umbrella. So this really threw me. I didn't know where she was coming from. I said, maybe, didn't think about it again, but she kept bringing it up on other phone calls. Every other one, I would say she would throw out this idea, "You should write about me, what happened to me during the war." And the reason this really surprised me is because she absolutely never mentioned the war before this. It was kind of an open secret in my family. We all knew she was a Holocaust survivor, but none of us ever spoke about it. There was this real shroud of silence around what happened. So I didn't know any of the details of her story, what she endured. I just knew something happened. And so the fact that she was suddenly asking me to write about it and for us to like peel back this silence was really jarring. And it took a lot for her to convince me. She did convince me, as you can see, probably like a year and a half of these phone calls before I finally said yes. And I flew down to Florida where she was living to start these conversations and learn the details of what happened. Even though I never totally understood why she started asking me to write about her, I did understand why she was calling me, because my grandma could speak 6 languages fluently, but she could not read or write in any of them. This is pretty unusual for a Holocaust survivor. Most survivors were very well educated, either receiving an education before the war or continuing their education afterwards. But that wasn't the case for my grandma. So for her to be able to tell her story and put it down on paper, it was always something where she would need a translator of sorts. She would need someone to help her. And so that's part of why she did convince me, and I flew to Florida. And we spent about half a week together talking about the Holocaust for the first time really ever in our lives. One of the reasons that was really hard for me to get in this space is that our relationship had nothing to do with her past experiences, which were really quite traumatic and difficult. But our relationship could be quite light and simple. We watched Wheel of Fortune together. Her favorite show was Baywatch. We baked in the kitchen together. It was really this very simple, loving relationship. So for me to start to see who she was as a teenager and what she endured was a very long journey because it was not the person that I knew. And I have a really short snippet from the book that I'm going to read that shows some of this juxtaposition of who she was and how I knew her, but then also her history and how that stayed with her and how, in a lot of ways, it was hidden from me. So this takes place when I'm in Florida. One afternoon, a neighbor knocked on Bubby's door. Bubby opened it, and the woman handed her a large bouquet of flowers, leaving after less than a minute of small talk. I watched the exchange from the couch. As Bubby looked for a vase in the kitchen, I asked her who the lady at the door was, and she told me she didn't know her name. Right, okay. So why did she bring a bouquet? Apparently, this neighbor had been bedridden the week prior with a leg injury. When Bubby found out, she went out of her way to cook and deliver homemade food for the woman, never bothering to ask for details like what happened to her leg, or how she was feeling, or if she had a particular name she liked to go by. Bubby was a deeply generous person in this way. She didn't need to be asked or told because she was always at the ready. Ready to act, ready to give, ready to take charge and take care of things. People who were otherwise boring to her became interesting when ill. They gave her something to do, and there was nothing she liked more than having something to do. Her hands were especially keen on staying busy. They were always peeling, stirring, baking, dialing, sweeping, washing, turning, cleaning, fixing, something. With Bubby, it was always something. Only at night, when everything fell quiet and there was nothing for her hands to peel or stir or bake, no friends to visit or neighbors to feed, no pools to pad through or grocery stores to peruse. Only then would she lose this ceaseless forward motion. She would turn off the lights in her condo one by one and get into her bed backwards with her feet at the head of her bed and her head at the foot. She believed there was more air in the middle of the room and wanted to get as much of it as she could. She fluffed her pillow, laid her head upon it, and slid into the ever-pressing past. She couldn't help it. Even the most tireless people get tired sometime. At night, as the sky swelled with darkness and the ocean went black, the war caught hold of her. It did not let go. That's what she called what happened, the war. It summed everything up, all the suffering, all the loss, the bedlam, the bloodshed, the frozen toes. She had to learn the word Holocaust later like everybody else. She had to learn a whole new language. The words she knew were never enough. I'll pause there and continue telling you a little bit more about my experience of writing this book. So I went to Florida to spend time with my grandma, and during the day we ran errands, hung out together, and then at night we sat down and had these conversations where she told me about what happened during the war for her. She grew up in Sighet, Romania. If you're familiar with Elie Wiesel and the book Night, that book also starts in the same town. And so she told me about the ghetto and about being evicted from town, about being on cattle cars and in concentration camps. And what was so shocking to me was how raw it all still was for her, the way her voice could shake and modulate, get louder. She would imitate the sounds she heard, people yelling. It was all so crisp in her memory still, so many years later. She had many close calls. And what I learned was that her surviving the Holocaust was not something that happened once or twice, but it was a daily act, sometimes even more than that, in which she had to navigate unknown circumstances and make decisions where she couldn't possibly know what was going to happen based on her choice. She was in 3 concentration camps in total. And the first one and the third one are well-known concentration camps, Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. But the middle one was a small labor camp. And when she said the name, I really struggled to understand what she was saying. And it took me a year to actually research and find this exact camp. And that was another big part of my journey, was going on all of these like research hunts to be able to piece all of the stories together. She couldn't spell anything for me, so I had to take her conversations with me, transcribe them, and then go out on my own to try to piece all of the pieces together. One of the reasons this labor camp was so hard to find is that in my research, I learned that there were more than 44,000 camps, ghettos, and sites of murder throughout the Holocaust from 1933 to 1945. 44,000, that looks like a full map of Europe. It is truly astounding how expansive and systemic this program of genocide was. And so it took me a lot to find where this actual camp was. Another goal of mine in writing this book is that I read a lot of other Holocaust books and testimonies, and I was always amazed at how people could capture what happened, but so curious about what happened after liberation, what happened after the war ended for that particular person. Where did they go? What did they do? And I realized from knowing my grandma so well that her survival went far beyond the Holocaust. She had to survive liberation. She had to survive that period in Europe before she was able to emigrate. She had to survive being a refugee in a foreign country. She had to learn English once she had made it over to North America. It was like a constant wheel of survival. And that was one of the things that had really fueled her silence, is that she was so focused on just making ends meet, caring for her family, putting food on the table. And I wanted to represent that part of her survival as well. And so I do talk about her journey after the war and parts of our lives together, how I knew her, the type of grandma she was to me. She had a swimming pool in her backyard, and I was always so excited to go over there and spend time, if not with her, then with the pool. She really knew how to connect with her grandkids in that way. And even though we had this really loving bond, which I do write about, it also could be really frustrating because we were really different. We had grown up in such different environments and had such different outlooks on the world. And we often like struggled to communicate. Like how when we were talking about umbrellas, she would bring up the war and I'd have no idea why. When I was in Florida, we would go out and run errands together. And at the time, her walking wasn't so great. So I would go get her car and pull it to the front to pick her up. And when I did that, she wouldn't be there. I just kept losing her. Everywhere I went, she went somewhere else, even though she couldn't walk that well. She was always moving, going, and it was so confusing. Like, I said I'd be back in 2 minutes. Where did you go? And her answer was always, oh, I was trying to make it easier for you. And of course, she always made it harder for me. So there's also this dynamic of distance in our relationship, which I explore throughout the book. It's something that frustrated me because I really wanted to be close to her and know her well. But as I'm learning her story and starting to piece it together, I see that there is some value in distance. It took me a long time to come to that, but it was only because I had some distance from the Holocaust that I was really able to investigate it and ask questions and stay with frustrating research queries. It was the only reason I was able to sit with my grandma's story and what happened. I think for many people in my family, it's really hard to hold these details. Even if we learn them, we love to forget them too because they're really quite painful. And so I began to see the distance that she created between us, between the generations, as something of a gift, her way of trying to help us move forward, even as much as we may have wanted to remember and look back and reclaim some of that history as well. So there was always a push and pull between us in trying to navigate these relationships and this history. And the fact that she was the one who actually opened up the silence for my family and said, I want to tell my story. was actually this incredible opportunity for us all to learn a little bit more about what she endured and how she endured it. So if you're interested in that, the book is also here. I'm happy to answer questions at the end. Thank you all so much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Brooke. Holding my laptop in my lap. Okay, thank you, Brooke, very much. I will now introduce our next author. Lisa Barr is the New York Times and USA Today bestselling author of The Goddess of Warsaw, Woman on Fire, The Unbreakables, and the award-winning Fugitive Colors. Lisa served as an editor for the Jerusalem Post, managing editor of Today's Chicago Women, managing editor of Moment magazine, and as an editor reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times. Among the highlights of her career, Lisa covered the famous handshake between the late Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, the late PLO leader Yasser Arafat, and President Bill Clinton at the White House. Lisa has been featured on Good Morning America and Today for her work as an author and journalist. Actress Sharon Stone has optioned the rights to adapt Women on Fire for a film. Very cool. Okay, so now I will turn it over to Lisa.
Okay.
Take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Barr, and it is an honor to be here with all of you today. I'm dealing with long-term laryngitis, so I'm a little raspy, so please forgive. Julie, thank you so much for inviting me, and it is an honor to be with Brooke and Julie. As I've traveled all over the country on book tour, I always start off with what is at the forefront of my mind at all times, and it's the hostages, those who've been released or rescued from hell, and those who've been trapped there. So I just want to say I send my love and support out to my family, my friends, and colleagues in Israel, and I pray every single day for the hostages to come home safely. Resilience, defiance, survival against all odds is what I care about, what I write about. And this, us, right now, is a beautiful celebration of authors and books, and I don't take it for granted for a moment. It is truly a light during these dark, difficult times. As an author and a journalist for more than 30 years, The Goddess of Warsaw, over here, let's see if you can see it. This book is my fourth novel, and it's the book I was meant to write. It is truly a culmination of all my work. History meets passion, meets suspense, meets art, meets strong, fiery women is my jam. And Goddess is the harrowing and ultimately triumphant tale of a Jewish World War II resistance fighter turned Hollywood star whose personal war never ends. This story burned inside me. And I always say that the story that keeps you up at night as the one you have to write must go after no matter what. And this book is it for me. I also always say you can take the girl out of journalism, but never the journalism out of the girl. My years as an investigative reporter, both in the United States and abroad, served me well as an author of historical suspense, especially when it comes to research, knowing exactly how, when, where, and to deep dive, and of course, mastering the fine art of hooking the reader and leaving you with cliffhangers. Timing is everything as an author and a journalist. And a little secret, I like to infuse something of my own journalism experiences into each book that I write. Probably my most important story as a young reporter for the Jerusalem Post was covering the famous handshake between President Bill Clinton, the late Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, and PLO leader Yasser Arafat. While it was exhilarating covering that piece of history, we all know what happened. The peace process went south. Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated. I had returned to Israel and I had interviewed Leah Rabin in an exclusive interview for Vogue magazine just a few weeks after the assassination. I spent 4 hours interviewing Mrs. Rabin in her apartment, and she was this stoic woman mothering an entire nation whose dreams of peace had been quashed and whose husband of 47 years, an Israeli hero, was murdered. And during the interview, I said, Mrs. Rabin, when you go to bed at night and it's just you now, is he proud of you, how you are handling all of this without him by your side as you once did everything together? And her face dropped and she began to cry. And there was no reporter subject separation. She cried and I cried, and we held each other and remained friends until her passing. And this story, for me, remains to this day one of my most meaningful pieces. And it worked its way, mostly journalistic empathy, into my character, the young journalist in my novel, my World War II thriller, Woman on Fire. All of my books are different, but there are themes that thread my novels, particularly news hooks, real life events, and art. I always ask this question within each novel. How far would you go for your passion? Would you kill for it, steal for it, or fight for it, even if the price tag is your own life, like Lena Browning, born Bina Blonsky, the fearless and fiery heroine in The Goddess of Warsaw? As a daughter of a Holocaust survivor from Poland, this book for me is deeply personal. Everything you read in The Goddess of Warsaw that feels real is real. The majority of my research was done at the Illinois Holocaust Museum. The historical background of my book is the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, considered the most important Jewish revolt in World War II history. And it's told through the eyes of a fierce young woman who survives the war using her brains, her beauty, and her acting abilities, serving at first as a smuggler and then as an assassin for the Jewish resistance. After the war, our heroine becomes one of the most famous actresses of our time, a femme fatale, an empowered woman who never forgets the lessons of her past. Actress, assassin, avenger. The legendary Lena Browning, born Bina Blonsky, is not only glamorous, but she is lethal, utilizing her Hollywood sets as the ultimate cover to avenge her loved ones by hunting down those Nazis who escaped justice by hiding out in America, in Hollywood, her turf. Goddess is filled with secrets and lies and twists and turns and a burning pursuit of justice, no matter the cost. This is the heart of the story. As I set out to research this book, several questions emerged. What is the fine line between the pursuit of justice and the hunt for revenge? What is the price tag for survival? And is there an expiration date for revenge? And ultimately, as I wrote this novel, I thought to myself, how do I capture Jewish history's darkest chapter and create a page turner with a Hollywood twist? Most interesting, but personally difficult, who would have thought that a story I began writing and researching nearly 4 years ago, discussing an historical event that took place 81 years ago, would be eerily relevant in today's world and very difficult political climate. It means so much to me that as a proud Jewish author, to be able to tour with this book depicting one of the most important and pivotal tales of Jewish resistance right now. Lena Browning is a woman from the past and a woman of our times. She's badass, unapologetic, and deliciously fearless. And I kind of fell in love with her as I wrote her. And strangely, when I've encountered tough times since October 7th as a Jewish author, I would think to myself, what would Bina Blonsky, Lena Browning do? So this is going to sound strange and crazy, but I actually have looked to my own character for inspiration. Here's a quote from the book that defines Goddess and defines Lena Browning in her own words. I have spent my life as an actress. It is the only way I could breathe. Like you, I kept my past hidden from everyone. But on the side, I did what I had to do, serving justice while the world looked the other way. It is the only thing that has given my life meaning. The war is long over, but not for me, never for me. So here's the takeaway. If you read my body of work, it's righting the wrongs of history. That's what my books are about, what my characters are about, what I'm about. It's all about seeking truth and not giving up, a fight to the finish line. I gravitate toward this in both my real life and in my book life, especially empowered women faced with survival scenarios with a choice. Sink or swim. I choose swim, and so do my characters. I relish giving readers a little bit of everything. Sometimes my publishing house has a hard time trying to decide what box to put me in. So I write a page turner. I write about complicated relationships. I love triangles, passion and fire, risk, historical nuggets. But my end game, admittedly, is to keep you up past your bedtime because you have to read just one more chapter. Then I've done my job. We all, everyone in this Zoom room has a voice in our heads. For most, it's a parent or a sibling. For me, my goddess, my heroine will always be my grandmother as well, my Grandma Rachel, who was my best friend, a fighter, a Holocaust survivor, who had seen the worst atrocities of mankind, having lost her parents and siblings, aunts and uncles and cousins in Auschwitz. And yet she still believed in love, believed in goodness, laughed with her whole body. Nothing could get in the way of the joy my grandmother felt about her family, her legacy. And that for her was survival. She taught me that. My grandmother's spirit guides my hands, the stories I choose, the words that move me to write, and the reason I fight for what I fight for, standing up to hate and anti-Semitism. I'm sure you've heard that since October 7th, many Jewish authors have been blacklisted, canceled, harassed, threatened with violence, and review bombed. I have been among those authors hardest hit because I'm a triple threat for the haters. Daughter of a Holocaust survivor, very much a pro-Israel activist on social media, and a writer of World War II historical thrillers wrapped around the Holocaust. But I will never cower or back down in the face of anti-Semitism. You may have heard about another book that has been published, and it's called On Being Jewish Now. It's an anthology, a compilation of 75 Jewish authors, podcasters, and influencers. It's behind me as well. It's called On Being Jewish Now. And I'm part of this book. Within my essay, I wrote, and I very much feel this, on October 6th, I knew what I wanted from life. But after October 7th, I knew what life wanted from me. Loud and proud. This is my personal mission as a woman, as a Jew, as a mother of 3 young adult daughters, as an author and a journalist. And I wanted to just share this little story before I wrap up. So my book tour has been since May of last year. And my first stop was in South Carolina. So I had a big event and there was maybe 400 people. And I believe I was probably the only Jewish person in the room. And I was very emotional given everything that's gone on, as all of us have been. So this woman came up to me and she said, "Lisa, I'm not Jewish And I know it's not, quote, politically correct to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. The Jews, the Israelis, they just don't give up. And I love that. Just love it. Your character moved me because she doesn't give up. And despite these very difficult times, don't you ever give up. I hold on to these words, this upstander, this reader, this beautiful human. It is the fuel I have needed many times over this past year and a half throughout my Goddess book tour. Bina Blonsky turned Lena Browning is my favorite character that I've written because of her incredible strength in the face of adversity. She is the leading lady of her own life. She calls the shots during the war and in Hollywood from the first page down to the last line. And she is my kind of girl. Thank you for reading Goddess. Thank you for lifting authors in our books. And Julie and everyone else here, it is truly an honor and a privilege. Thank you.
And like play spotlighted clap at the same time. But Lisa, yesterday I was telling my husband like who I was having on the event, and I described you as a lioness. And he's like, I've never heard you use that word in this, and like in speaking from like, no, she's a lioness. And Bina / Lena is total badass, as you said, and just kol hakavod. And thank you. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
Okay, I am gonna introduce our third author. As a child, Julie Brill held two conflicting beliefs. She knew Germans had murdered her Jewish grandfather in occupied Yugoslavia, yet she somehow believed the Holocaust had never come to his hometown of Belgrade. Her quest to understand and share what she learned led to Hidden in Plain Sight, a family memoir, and the untold story of the Holocaust of Serbia. Julie has written for Haaretz, The Forward, Feller, The Times of Israel, Balkan Insight, and elsewhere. She shares her family's experiences in the Holocaust in middle and high school classrooms through Living Links. Additionally, Julie is a lactation consultant, doula, childbirth educator, and the author of the anthology Round the Circle. Doulas share their experiences. She is the mother of 2 adult daughters, and she lives in the Boston area. So let me spotlight you. Take it away, Julie.
Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much, Julie. My book just came out on Wednesday. So I'm kind of in this like new book launch blur. And I'm just really happy to kind of have this opportunity to sit down with all of you and tell you a little bit about the story. So as Julie said, my father is a survivor, a child survivor from Belgrade, Yugoslavia. And as a small child, I heard his stories. I know there are some survivors who never tell their stories. My father was not like that. He told us these stories, my brother and I, but the stories were young child memories, kind of unfiltered. Like I would say to him, Dad, how did you survive the war? I don't understand. And he would say, my mother was really tough and she wasn't going to let the Nazis get to me. That is like an understanding of a small child, right? A lot of children with really tough parents were murdered, right? So it doesn't make any sense. And I was always trying to fit in his stories with the historical record, not just of the war and the Holocaust, but just of what was happening in Yugoslavia. It always seemed like this kind of magical, mystical place that you couldn't get to, like, I don't know, Oz or something. He would say things like, my great grandfather was the doctor to the king. Really? That sounds like a fairy tale. Or he would talk about the camp where his father was held, and it was in the center of the city, and his mother would go there and bring him food. And I would think, like, we learned about the Holocaust in Hebrew school. That's not what the Holocaust is. The Holocaust is, you know, they put you on a cattle car. You never you never came home again. You went to a camp that was far away. Like, your stories don't make any sense. And so I thought that the Holocaust had and hadn't come to Yugoslavia. No one was ever talking about Yugoslavia. They were talking about Germany. They were talking about Poland, of course, and Frank and Holland, and then mumble, 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 something else, right? But the reality is the story of what happened in Eastern Europe, and my family story is typical and atypical, is not the story that we learned in Hebrew school. So more Jews were murdered outside the camps than in them. Most Jews died in their village, in the woods outside, in their hometown. They were not moved anywhere. And we don't hear those stories because of something called the Auschwitz principle. Timothy Snyder, the historian, says, we know about Auschwitz. Auschwitz was a terrible place, of course, 1 million Jews murdered, but tens of thousands of survivors, mostly in their teens and 20s, in the 40s, who many of them lived long lives and afterwards and told their stories. So we know those stories. You need survivors and now descendants to know the stories. Where my grandfather was murdered in Belgrade, more than 90% of the Jews were murdered. So there were very few people to tell the story. And so there's this kind of irony. That's the reason I wrote this book. So I was in the US Holocaust Memorial Library in Washington, D.C., trying to find out about the story that hadn't been written yet because it's my book. And they're alphabetical by country. So I go all the way down to get to Y, and Y is empty. There's nothing. There's no books on Yugoslavia. And that's really the moment when I thought, oh, I have to write this book. And now the book, if you're in Washington, is in the museum bookshop. There is a book under Y. Um, I wanted to show you just a couple of pictures and just a little bit of a snippet of reading. I know we don't have a lot of time today, but I wanted to show you the pictures that are the pictures we had as kids. So these pictures were not framed. They were in an envelope somewhere, and they would sometimes appear. So my mother would be cleaning, and all of a sudden we'd be holding these pictures. You know, they're important, Julie. Don't hurt it. Like I'm like a little kid. I'm holding them like by the edges. Remember when things were not all digital? And there were 4 pictures. So this is the first one. This is my grandparents on their wedding day, and I studied this picture. I wanted to like warn them, right? Like they look so happy, and I know what's coming. And of course, the Holocaust happened so fast in Eastern Europe. My grandfather was arrested in April of 1941. He was murdered in November. So the US hadn't even entered the war yet. The Nazis did not have the final solution yet. People did not know what to expect because it had never happened before. So these are my grandparents. My grandmother was a seamstress. She made the dress she's wearing. During the war, she will cut up the train because she needs fabric for her children to have clothing. I'll show you another picture. This is the other picture we have of my grandfather. So his wedding day, and this is a few years later. The baby is my father. We have this third picture, my grandmother and my father as a little boy right before the war. And then there was this picture. You can probably see it's the cover of the book. This is my father, and my aunt Shoshana is the little girl. And we think this was taken in 1943. They are standing on the street. Dad, how is this possible? How did you survive? How were you not even hiding? That's why the book is entitled Hidden in Plain Sight. I could just never understand. I understand now, not only is this seem impossible, but just having a picture taken on the street in occupied Europe, the Germans outlawed cameras. Civilians couldn't have cameras. They didn't want what they were doing recorded. Somehow my grandmother, who, you know, was a tough woman, got this picture taken. And I think she had it taken mostly to be able to share it with my grandfather, who she always believed was coming home. She never lost faith that he was going to come back to them. She never dated, she never remarried. Okay. I want to just give you a quick taste of the book. And this is right at the beginning, so it doesn't need much setup. I had mentioned I always thought Belgrade was like Oz. We couldn't go there, in part because my father came to the US in 1965 and worked like an immigrant. There weren't vacations. So money, travel time, I didn't speak Serbian, communism. There were a lot of barriers. And this is when I start to think, oh, maybe we could go to Belgrade. In the book I talk about, I go to Belgrade 3 times with my dad and my daughters. So we're together, my dad and my daughter and I. We cruise down the narrow street of Dorchel. Belgrade's Jewish neighborhood with Google Earth Street View, searching for the house where my father lived before World War II. His family stretched back at least 4 generations in that Serbian city until the Holocaust snapped the links in our chain. My 20-year-old daughter, Rebecca, sits on a tall chair at the kitchen island of my parents' home, navigating on her laptop. My father sits beside her, leaning in to see the images. I stand behind and look between them. The back of my father's head is gray but not balding, shaved military short by my mother, a contrast to Rebecca's long, dark curls. Although my father left the country almost 70 years ago, he is sure of the address. He remembers the 2-story row house he lived in with his parents and his uncles at Solinska Olika 8. From the front window, the 3-year-old boy, who would grow up to be our family's patriarch, could see the tops of the helmets of German soldiers patrolling his neighborhood in pairs. I imagine a dark-haired boy standing on tiptoes, lifting a corner of curtain to peer out wide-eyed at the scary sight of armed occupiers goose-stepping past. His mother had forbidden it, so it was a naughty thing to do. Rebecca leads us virtually up and down the street, but we can't find my father's childhood home. Looking at the computer screen, it's as if I'm in Dorchel, a Jewish neighborhood now stripped of its Jews, watching out the window of the Google car. I see pedestrians and parked vehicles that happened to be there in a moment and now dwell there permanently. We spot Hebrew writing on one building and a Star of David on another. We roll by the synagogue and the Jewish community center where my father, grandmother, and aunt lived after the war, in a single room in an apartment with 4 other survivors, including a rabbi. Back and forth, but the home my father remembers seems no longer to be there. It almost feels like technology should allow us to scroll, not just across the world, but across time. There should be a button to click for a street view of Dorchel circa 1938. So I'm always trying to imagine how my father's stories fit into the greater narrative. So for example, he told us a story over and over again when we were kids, and it was almost like he was a kid because it was a childhood memory talking to us, my brother and I, as kids. And the story was he woke up and there was bombing. And he remembered the sounds of the bombs. They made like this whistling sound, so scary. And what I know now is that earliest memory is the start of the Holocaust in Yugoslavia. That bombing that the Germans did was a surprise bombing. There had been no declaration of war. And so people actually thought it was an air show. No one had any idea what was going on. And his memory is his mother's trying to like get him out of the house. They're going to run to the bomb shelter. It was in another part of the neighborhood. And she somehow, as they're leaving, put on the wardrobe a plate of cookies. And as a little kid, I was like, oh yeah, like the plate of cookies. Like my dad at 3 and me, at 3 or 4 or 5 were interested in these cookies. He remembers running through the streets and that whistling sound of the bombs. He remembers getting into the shelter and everybody looking serious. He didn't know how long they were there, but they were probably there about 3 days. And it was so dangerous. So there was a turncoat, and that person told the Germans where the civilian bomb shelters were. So they were bombing the bomb shelters. Somehow they get out after 3 days when the bombing is over. He doesn't remember at all coming home. He must have walked by horrible things. What he remembers is coming home and the plate had neatly split in 2. And he had once dropped a cup that had shattered, and here was a plate like in 2 little pieces. And that was the part that he could remember, like not all the destruction, right? But just that plate. And so the 2 of us were kind of like, yeah, Dad, how did that plate and the cookies, And then I was able to go past that, put some historical wrapping around it to understand what was happening, and then really explain it to him. I mean, he didn't study the Holocaust. He didn't even think of himself as a Holocaust survivor until very recently. So they got through the war. After the war, things were terrible in Belgrade. In 1948, they get out and they go to Israel, my grandmother, my father, and my aunt. And there, you know, it's also terrible in the late 40s in Israel. There's a war and not enough food. There's no pride in being a Holocaust survivor. And anyway, Holocaust survivors are the people who survived the camps. You know, they came from Auschwitz and they have the numbers on their arm. So he never thought of himself as a Holocaust survivor until recently, and he never knew this history. We think about, oh, parents pass history down to their children, right? This is the family history. This is why these things happened. This is the larger context. For me, I really passed it up to my dad. And this book is really this father-daughter story of us working together, sometimes being reluctant, one or the other. This is really hard stuff. But in the end, it felt like I was giving him back a gift that the Nazis had stolen, our own family history. Um, you know, we went to Belgrade 3 times with my adult daughters, and what I really learned was um, my father is from Belgrade. This is his hometown. We went to the cemetery where family is buried. I'm from outside Boston, but in Vermont, they say you are a Vermonter when you have 4 grandparents in the ground. I'm not from anywhere by that definition, but my father is from Belgrade. And so that was really another gift of being able to see him in his hometown and being able to share that with him. And I write about in the book too what it's like for my daughters, who I always sheltered from the Holocaust as much as I could because I had so much early exposure, what it was like for them to go and hear these stories firsthand in Belgrade. So I'm going to stop there, but thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer questions if anybody has them.
So much. I'm gonna, that was great, Julie. I'm gonna add all of us to the spotlight while you guys are putting your questions in the chat. And it's just so, I'll say while you're doing that, like, so interesting what the child's mind remembered, like that he latched onto those cookies. It
Yeah.
makes total sense, right? That's what he
I
latched
mean,
onto.
we doubted so much, like not in front of him, but my mom and my brother and I were always like, is this possible? And everything he said is historically accurate.
Full kavod to you for like getting the first Holocaust book from Yugoslavia out there.
Thank
I
you so
can't
much.
believe it's the first. It's amazing.
I know. I always felt like
Wow.
if someone beats me to the punch, I'll just stop. Like I didn't feel like it had to be this story, but there had to be some story.
And it's so beautiful also what you said about that you passed it up. You're passing up to your dad. So
Thank you.
okay, I see that a question right at the beginning from Mimi. Thank you, Brooke, for sharing your grandmother's story. Are there groups that you could suggest to connect with other children of the Holocaust survivors? So I think probably all 3 of you could answer that question.
Yeah, there are a lot of groups and a lot of them are locally based, so it does depend a little bit where you live. There is a group called the World Federation of Jewish Holocaust Survivors and Descendants. It's a little bit long. I can drop the URL in the chat. They meet once a year and they have a lot of different partner groups that come. And so you can find more local groups from their website as well. There are groups of children of Holocaust survivors, as well as 3rd generation or 3Gs, which are grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. A lot of these groups are willing to, be broad in their interpretation of these generations. So there's definitely a lot of options out there to find people who have similar family stories and who meet regularly.
Okay, there's a question from iPhone. I don't know who you are. It's Julie and Brooke. Is there research you did not include in your books, and will you be writing about that research in other ways?
So
And I'll
yes.
add, and I'll expand that to Lisa as well. That's also.
Yeah. I have much more information on the history than I included because I really wanted the book to be readable and engaging, and because in the US, most of us honestly are starting, myself included, are starting so far back with the history. I wanted enough history that you could understand the family story and not so much that your eyes rolled back in your head. I was going for that balance. I would like to write about it in other ways. I published recently in a Serbian academic journal where I was able to put some of that out there. So there are other ways to do it.
Yeah, I also did a lot of research that didn't make it into the book. Just give you like a small kind of flavor of that. The second camp my grandma was in was a labor camp that was built in a forest, specifically to feed into a bomb factory. And that bomb factory is run by a company that is still in operation today. And so I did a lot of research about this company. It happens to be the company that Alfred Nobel started. And so there's a really fascinating legacy of there. Someone who invents dynamite has such regrets about his life's work and then invents the Nobel Peace Prizes. And so I went down a whole rabbit hole there. But my grandma's sister was the one who worked in this factory, not her. And so in the end, I did cut a lot of this story, but it was fascinating to me to know that the companies that were producing bombs during the war, many of them are still in existence today.
And so mine has more of a fiction element to it. So I knew exactly what I wanted to get in the book, and it was more of a different angle, trying to wrap my character's journey around it, and to weave it in a way that it was seamless. So I had to go from Warsaw to Hollywood and sort of still pull in a lot of the history, but given that it was 1943 and sort of the heyday of Hollywood in the 1950s, which was right after the war, I was able to get in, Operation Paperclip, which, just very briefly was very much a stain on America, because they went in and they rescued and gave fake identities to more than 1,600 major Nazis in order to, the scientists, doctors, technicians, and engineers, and including the guy who invented the gas chambers, brought him over here. So in my mind, how was I going to have my main character expose this? And so I really did try to get in all the history that I knew was essential, during that time, but to fictionalize it, but yet keep the essence of what really happened, so it was at times difficult to kind of create that reality and combine it with fiction.
Yeah, talking about going down a research rabbit hole, I was
Yeah.
identifying, Julie, with what you were saying about, like, I should be able to click and get to
Right.
an exact street view.
Yeah.
Because I'm actually, my current work in progress is also takes place in like kind of pre-Holocaust and during the Holocaust in Poland and France. And I keep trying to zoom in, I keep like going back to my grandparents' shtetl and trying to like, why can't I see their street, like my
Right.
grandmother's street? I have the
Right.
name of the street. Why can't I find it on this shtetl map? I keep going, and like I go down I spend like whole hours of my writing time. That isn't a lot, trying to find like a street view of it. And I was there once. I was in
Yeah.
Seattle once in 1993 or something, 94, and we met the last Jew who had survived by being hidden by a Catholic woman, and then after the war he married her. And he still remembered my uncles, and so he brought us to the plot where their house was. And so I have in my mind like sort of where it was based on the town square, but I still am like, why can't I just click and see it?
Yeah.
So
It's amazing on the one hand, all the things we can get. I mean, there's new documents being released all the time. And then on the other hand, these things that we can't access.
right, totally. Um, Okay, this is a question from Carolyn for Lisa. Your books are so imaginative. You mentioned news hooks. Were all of your novels based on an actual news hook?
Um, just to repeat the question, a little
Oh,
hard to hear.
Were all of your you mentioned news hooks. Were all of your novels based on an actual news hook and not just this most recent one?
Yes, all of them, all four that I've written so far have been a news hook. And two of the four related to Nazi looted art. And so there was a lot with that. And my second one, called The Unbreakables, very sexy women's fiction, a big departure, but it was based on the Ashley Madison, story. Which I don't know if you know about that. It's where hackers were breaking into a website for married cheaters. And so 32 million cheaters were exposed. And so that's where my story begins. So yeah, I'm very much coming from a news background. I love jumping off a real story and fictionalizing it, yet keeping, very close attention to the truth.
I do the same.
Yeah.
A lot of my stories also jumping off the news hook, and that reminds me of so I mentioned another book because you mentioned Operation, was it paper clip?
Paperclip, yeah.
Yeah, so we had at Literary Modiin a few years ago, Patrick Hicks, and
Oh, yeah.
his book, In the Shadow of Dora, which talks about this survivor who is working at NASA, and they brought over like the Nazi who was responsible for, you know, inventing or building the bomb, like and yeah, it's crazy,
Crazy.
shameful. Yeah, but I guess not surprising.
Yeah.
So, do you guys have any questions for each other?
Mm.
Brooke, did you get to share your story with your grandmother? I mean, I don't, she's passed, right? I don't know the timing of all of it.
Yeah, she passed before it was published, but I printed a copy of the book at FedEx, and she was so impressed by that alone. And I would go to her place over like this course of weeks and read it chapter by chapter to her. So she did get to hear it. And the chapters that are interview transcriptions of her own words, they were her favorite chapters.
Yeah.
I
And
love
so you
those
said read,
chapters also.
Yes,
Those
I
yeah.
do too.
like, oh, I can hear your grandmother talking.
You read to her because you said she was illiterate. Like, it's just so interesting to me to think about like functioning in this world. I mean, was she trying to hide it? Was she open about it? Like,
She
how
wasn't
did she?
open about it.
Yeah,
She was very smart in other ways. So
you'd
she had
have to
ways to
be.
get things
Yeah.
done. She had an amazing memory. And so like everything she did, she just knew how to do it, committed it to memory. She knew how to ask. She was very vocal. And so that would be like her other way to get things done. But I think a lot slipped through the cracks too. There's certainly a lot of mail that she could never read, and so she didn't know. And so she did need to rely on other people, but it was not something she was, open about. It was something she just knew how to work around.
Okay, I'm gonna wrap this up by saying two more things. So thank all three of you so much for sharing your words and your stories, and everyone on this call should go out and get these three books. And second thing is save the date because on May 18th is our next event, and we'll be hearing actually another Holocaust related book, which is Helen Shari Motro's The Right to Happiness, short stories. I was in a writing group with her in Tel Aviv, and she writes a lot of the stories of survivors, like once they're in New York. We also have Howard Lovey, Found and Lost, the Jake and Kate story, and Rebecca Wolf, Alive and Beating. So, start out. And lastly, I want to end, as I've been doing since October 7th, by saying prayer for our captives. So, just here, okay. Mishaberach Avoteno v'Imoteno Avraham v'Sara Yitzchak v'Rivka Yaakov Leah v'Rachel v'Eloch Aminu Yoshua David v'Yehuda Torah Yael v'Yehudit hu yivarech et shvuyei v'nederei tzahal v'ezrachim v'ezrachiyot hachatufim v'chatufot הנתונים והנתונות בשביה ובצרה יהי רצון לפניך אדוני צבאות שתפדה נפשם משבי ותחזירם במהרה לארצם ומשפחתם ולביתם בריאים ושלמים בגופם ובנפשם ותיתן צפונה בלב העמלים ושחרורם ותיתן רחמים בלב שוביהם יקוים בהם הכתוב כל ברמה נשמע נהי בכי תמרורים רחל מבכה ארבע נלמד להילחם בניה כי איננו, כה אמר אדוני מנעי קולך מבכי בעינייך מדמעה כי יש שכר לפעולתך נאום אדוני ושבו מארץ אויב ויש תקווה לאחריתך נאום אדוני ושבו בנים ובנות בגבולם. And that's from the book of Jeremiah, Sefer Yirmiyahu, the original. Thank you all so much for being here, and maybe hear good news soon. B'sorot tovot.
Mhm.
Yeah, hope that's the last time I have to say that. Shberach. All right, bye everyone. Have a great
Bye,
night or
everybody.
day wherever you are.
Bye.
Bye.